Welcome back to the podcast. I'm Carrie Hawker-Diaz, and this week we are diving into the power of storytelling and how it shapes not only our personal lives and, of course, our careers, but also how we connect with the world around us. Our guest this week is Steve Mann. He's a gifted storyteller who helps people discover and share their voices, whether it's through words, writing, or simply showing up authentically. Steve explains why storytelling isn't just meaningful, it's transformative. He also shares how telling your story can be a powerful way to pass on life's biggest lessons. We loved this conversation, and I think you will too. Let's take a listen. Today, we are diving into the powerful world of legacy, connection, and the stories that shape us. Our guest is Steve Mann, author, speaker, global entrepreneur, and passionate legacy storytelling advocate. He does all the things. Welcome, Steve.
Well, thank you for having me. That's kind of a mouthful to go through all that, isn't it?
You deserve it, though. I mean, you've done a lot. This is amazing to be able to chat with you. Okay, Steve, speaking of that, you have had an impressive global journey from Africa to Southeast Asia. Can you share how your experiences abroad shaped your views on storytelling and that connection with people?
Yeah, well, I grew up on a small potato farm in Idaho, and the idea of traveling the world was almost beyond belief. But I was very, very fortunate and started traveling for business and then for humanitarian organizations. And then we lived 7 years in Africa. And through that process, I was often trying to learn about the culture, learn about the people, so that I could create AIDS programs, prevention programs, or leadership programs. And the first thing I would do is ask them, tell me about yourself. What are your stories? And I wasn't so much interested, well, I came from this province or this town, as what was your growing up like? What did it feel like? What did it smell like? What did it taste like? And the more I could get that feel, the more it was real to me, and the better programs I could create because I had a better understanding of the people. That's
cool because you like to get to know who somebody is. You know, like at the deeper level. Well, you founded and co-founded multiple businesses, Steve, and charitable foundations. How did storytelling play a role in those ventures?
Well, actually, story reading started it. When I was a kid, I couldn't really see very well. I was nearsighted, couldn't play basketball or sports because I couldn't see the ball until it hit me. But I could read. And I read voraciously, and one of the things I remember still from grade school was reading a book about Albert Schweitzer and starting a medical clinic in Africa. And for a potato farmer from Idaho, that was about as far away as you could get. But that stuck with me. And I think when you have things that stick with you or dreams that you have, even when you're very young, you don't necessarily lay out a plan. I'm going to do step A, B, C, and D, but you're more aware of opportunities. And so over time, I would take opportunities in business or in international travel or meeting people to start getting closer to that. And then eventually, we ended up in Africa working on HIV/AIDS prevention.
Wow. Okay. So so when you were younger, because of the book, and how old did you say you were?
Oh, it was grade school, probably.
Grade school.
Yeah. And, but those stories changed my life, and stories all the way through changed my life and changed my family's life. I had come back from Africa at one point, and we were asked to go to a meeting, and I didn't know what it was, but it turned out it was a meeting trying to recruit a couple missionaries. And so halfway through, I turned to my wife and said, we can't do that with 6 dependent children, but who cares? Want to go to Africa? See if we can make a difference with AIDS? She said yes, and 5 months later, we were living in Harare.
Wow.
With all 6 kids.
I was going to say, probably, yeah. How old was the oldest?
The oldest one had just started college. Had one who finished our senior year of high school over there, 2 in junior high school, and 2 in grade school.
Steve, that's phenomenal. Wow. Wow. Okay, and your book is titled Stories That Shape Us, a guide to passing down wisdom, joy, and love to the next generations. What inspired you to take all of this and put into a book?
Well, I, like many people, probably, particularly in the Valley, had written a brief kind of 100-page, here's my life. Boring as all get out. I was this place, met this. Nobody cares about any of that. And I also realized that wouldn't tell my grandchildren or great-grandchildren anything about what I believed, what I was passionate about, what I wanted to pass on to them. So I started with the idea of maybe I could identify traits, beliefs, principles that were important to me, and then I started illustrating those with stories from my life. And partway through, I said, I bet a lot of people would like to do this, so I turned it into more of a workbook. Here's how you can create your own traits and stories. How you can come up with your stories. How you can have a conversation with your grandchildren.
Oh, that's really cool. How long did it take you to complete it?
It took about a year to write the book, and it's taken about that much longer to get it all put together and out to Amazon and all
I
that
imagine
kind of
it's
stuff.
a lot of work.
It is a lot of work. But I think like most authors, it probably has changed me as much as it will anybody who does it.
Yeah.
I also got encouraged along the way. I was reading bedtime stories to one of my grandkids. Ran out of stories. They said, well, tell us about you, Grandpa. So I started telling them stories from my life. And I was talking to one of my 7-year-olds once, telling them about how their uncles, my 2 youngest children, who are black, used to be followed home periodically by the police when they were young. And Benjamin, my 7-year-old grandson, looked at me and said, Grandpa, that's dumb. Why would anybody do that? Mm-hmm. And so that led to a discussion of prejudice and discrimination. Now, and in fact, he wouldn't let it go. So the next morning, he brought it up with his family, and the discussion continued. Now, if I had sat down with Benjamin and said, okay, Benjamin, I have a lecture for you on discrimination.
Right.
Case closed,
Right.
all over.
Right.
But because he heard a story about somebody he related to, now it was his conversation, his questions getting answered, not somebody trying to push something on him.
Sure, because it was your story and involved you.
Yeah.
Okay, speaking of stories, what do you believe makes those stories more powerful than traditional advice? Like we were just saying, that he listened much more intently than he would have maybe if it was involving somebody else when it comes to teaching life lessons.
I think in today's society, we are inundated with data.
Yeah.
From the social media, and now AI is transforming all that again. But data doesn't give us perspective. It doesn't give us humanity. It doesn't give us a sense of belonging that stories do. So any kid can look up, say, prejudice or discrimination and find tons and tons of things. Mm-hmm. But it's not the same as talking to a relative, somebody they know or somebody they are related to, telling them a personal story that they can know about. I think the other thing with stories is we're able to illustrate it to the other senses. Here's what it smelled like. Here's what it tasted like. Here's what it felt like. And that comes across. I bet you can do that right now if you think about things that have been important to you in your past. Mm-hmm. My guess is you can remember where you were, what it smelled like, what it felt like, what your emotions were like. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you just read something in a book, okay, that's interesting.
Well, it encompasses all those senses.
Yes.
So it's like it completely encompasses you. I really like that, Steve. Okay, if, we talked about using storytelling to strengthen bonds, how can families do that and navigate difficult conversations? Because these conversations can be tough.
They certainly can. I think we live in a society where we don't talk to each other anymore. You've seen it, and I have. Yeah. Families are divided. Not going to talk to Uncle Harry. We're going to avoid him like crazy. Or neighbors don't talk to each other. One has a Trump sign, one has a Democratic sign. Keep away from them. Mm-hmm. And that leads to all kinds of problems. It forces us to the sides. But we're afraid to talk. I'm in a little empty nesters group, and they're all in our 70s, 80s, and really an accomplished group of people. They've been all over the world. They're geneticists, nuclear physicists. And I brought up with them last year during election year, I said, what would you think if we took one of the election issues and had a discussion of that in our little group? No way. We might offend somebody. We don't want to do that. I'm thinking, isn't that a shame? The people we would most like to learn from are afraid to talk, and we're afraid to talk with them. So one of the things I put in the book was a bonus chapter, which anybody can download for free. But the bonus chapter is how to talk to friends and neighbors about controversial issues.
That's a good one.
And it really starts with when you go set the ground rules, and the first ground rule ought to be, we're not here to convert, we're here to learn. And if you start with that basic ground rule.
You're not there to change someone.
That's right.
Right.
We're just here to understand. And, another ground rule is don't try to beat people up with data. That's not going to do anybody any good. That's not listening. That's not trying to understand. That's making your case. And so my hope is that people can go through this and just venture out a little bit and say to a friend or a neighbor, I've always admired what you've done in life, and I've always wanted to understand more about what your beliefs are on this subject. Would you be willing to just talk to me?
It kind of changes things, doesn't it?
Yeah.
When you think of that.
Nobody's going to say no to that. Say, well, okay. And then it starts leading into a discussion where if you follow the ground rules, you can take it further and begin to understand them.
Yeah. I've always heard that when you go into a conversation trying to understand instead of trying to be understood,
yeah,
that can change the conversation really quick.
I had a great professor in graduate school, and he had this class where every week you'd take a different subject, like environmentalism or racism or something, and you'd read all the pros and all the cons and kind of debate it, and then you'd go to the next one. And at the end of that class, I was having an interview with him, and he said, "What would you think of the class, Steve?" I said, well, I really enjoyed it, but I also kind of didn't like it. He said, why? I said, because I love being passionately devoted to a cause. And when I understand both sides, it's harder to do that. And he looked at me and he smiled and he said, Steve, that's the role of the educated man, to keep the sides from killing each other while you help them work through solutions. And that has stuck with me my whole life. Again, a story that exhibits something better than I could just tell you, here's what I did.
Right. Oh, Steve, that's good. Well, and going back to storytelling, do you have any tips on how to make that fun and impactful for kids, or like you said, your grandkids?
Make it informal first.
Okay, that's a good one.
Start first, because we don't do that, and ask them lots of questions, and ask them for their stories. I mean, how many kids do you know that don't have stories immediately if you'll ask them? And then what I try to do is, not with every story, the first thing I try to do is just enjoy the story. Let's talk about this and enjoy it. Tell your story. Let's talk about that and enjoy it. What do you learn from that? Oh, well, and that leads you into, or may lead you into a discussion. Not every story leads to a discussion, but a lot of them do.
How is that? Okay, so continuing that, how do you bridge that gap, that generational gap between grandparents and grandchildren?
I think the biggest hindrance in that make that gap is the grandparents, not the grandchildren.
Interesting, okay.
Grandchildren want to talk. They want to hear stories. They beg for them.
That's true. That is very true.
They want to know about their grandfather or their great-grandfather. I have a great-great-grandfather who joined the Church of Jesus Christ in England when he and his favorite girlfriend, I guess, escaped from a house, ended up getting married on the ship, coming across the ocean, getting to New York, figuring out how to get across the plains. I would love to know, what was he thinking when he escaped out of that house? What was he thinking as a teenager getting married on a boat to who knows where? What was he thinking when he got to New York? What did it feel like? I don't have those stories. but I sure would like to know because that's part of my heritage. And I think a little kid wouldn't describe it as his heritage, but he wants to know. And, I think a lot of times we think, well, teenagers don't care about anything. And I beg to differ with that. I think teenagers, they really do want to know. They may not be the ones asking. They may make a few snide comments in here.
Just a few.
Here and there. But they really do want to know where they came from. How do I put that in perspective? What do I belong to? And so they're more than willing to listen and tell some of their own stories, and as they try to relate to that.
So give them a chance.
Give them a chance.
Okay, and Steve, you mentioned that, we talk about how it shapes memory and learning storytelling. What have you discovered about the science behind why stories stick with us? Because they do.
They do, and I think it's some of the things we've talked about. They stick with us because they touch so many of our senses. A good storyteller, when you listen to them, you can feel what they're talking about. If they may be talking about a piece of granite high up in the Tetons that is absolutely solid, and they can feel that, and they feel that with their muscles. Well, all of a sudden now you've touched feeling. You can smell that air up there, and you can look across the valley, and now you're touching all the senses, and those stay with us. Now I'm 76. And sometimes I can't remember what I walked in a room for. And I can't remember people's names.
Steve, I do the same thing.
But I remember something that happened to me when I was 6.
Yeah.
Or when I was 8. Or when I did this. Or when I was in a different country. I remember the first time I went to Germany, and petrol, gas, doesn't smell the same there as it does here. And I can still smell that original German petrol.
Wow.
And I think most of us can do that. And that's what stories do this. And as they do that, they give us perspective on life. Okay, it's not just a paragraph from a book. Mm-hmm. I feel that, and I'm part of that. And that's what a story has the power to do.
Absolutely. Okay, and speaking of family stories, why do you think preserving those family stories is more important now than ever?
I think we are in an age where we are so inundated by social media and the internet and more AI that we begin to disconnect. We don't know what to believe. We don't know what to think about it. We don't know how to interpret it. And if you have a story from maybe a great-great-grandfather who you never knew, but you knew that was your great-great-grandfather. And he's telling you this story about something that happened to him, and he explains that, and you go, I can relate to that. Mm-hmm. My experience 3 generations later is very, very different, but I can still relate to what he's saying. I had a friend who grew up in Las Vegas in the 50s, when Las Vegas was one of the most segregated cities in the country.
Sure, yeah.
And he grew up in the white area. When he was 16, his dad sent him to work for his uncle over in the black area at a place that cleaned sheets for hotels. And he had a boss over there, a black guy, who he just viewed as the laziest, most worthwhile guy he'd ever met. And he really didn't like him. And after a couple of years, the guy said, could you give me a ride home? Okay, I don't like you, but I will. Then it was, well, could you pick me up? Okay. Well, when you come to pick me up, could you honk or give me a call? I'm thinking, this guy is so lazy. And then he began finding out the guy couldn't read or write, but he'd been promoted a number of times because he was very clever in this company. He didn't finish high school, had children very early before he was out of high school. They were in college, and he had 2 full-time jobs, as did his wife, and working other things on the side. So the reason he wanted him to honk is because he probably got home from his last job only an hour before.
Wow.
And he said, that changed my whole view of him and of people I interact with. I said, have you ever written this down? No. I said, well, don't you think somebody might be interested? Who would care? I said, well, think of a great-great-grandchild sometime who picks this up and reads this story of your encounter and how that changed you and how that might change that great-great-grandchild. I've never thought of it that way. Maybe I shouldn't be so judgmental. My great-great-grandfather had that experience. Maybe I ought to give it a chance. And he looked at me and said, I've never thought of that. I'm going to go write it down.
That's why we need to write it down.
That's why we need to write it down.
And it's just, when you dig deeper with someone's story, that you have so much more perspective.
Yeah.
It's so easy to quickly go, oh, like you said, they're lazy. They don't want to, yeah, but do we really know? We usually don't.
No,
we usually don't. What lessons, Steve, from your own parenting and grandparenting journey have influenced the way you teach storytelling?
I think storytelling is best taught by example and by doing it. I don't usually write down here 5 points to a great story. You can find those anywhere. But I try to tell the story and then have them tell a story of theirs and say, well, could you tell me more about that? Well, what happened here? What did it smell like? Were you afraid? What were your emotions? And that's how you teach storytelling, I think, by asking questions and by getting people to tell stories.
And like you said, just start.
Just start.
Just start. Who do you think will benefit most from your book, reading your book, and what do you want them to experience?
I hope that parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, that the book will help them engage in meaningful conversations with their descendants, with their grandkids, with their great-grandkids. And in the process, they will be better able to pass on to that generation so the things that are important to them. Here's what I learned, and I think this is so important. Let me tell you a story, and then it opens up a discussion. Most of our discussions, even in our own family, are about food, what's on television, sports, but we seldom talk about, I really value integrity. That's out of the blue, Grandpa. But if Grandpa starts with, let me tell you this story. What did you learn from that? What I learned from that was about integrity. What's integrity? Well, let's talk about that. Have you had an experience like that? That it opens a way for people to talk to each other.
Yeah.
And I think in the bonus chapter, which is really talking to our friends and neighbors about controversial issues, I hope it begins to open up dialogue, which we desperately need in this country, and I think around the world. We need to stop the finger pointing and listen. And I'm hopeful that that chapter will help people learn how to do that and take one little step toward opening a productive discussion.
That one little step. Okay, and speaking of that, is there one simple exercise or prompt that you could recommend for someone wanting to start sharing their story?
Start.
Yeah.
It's, and people say, well, I don't have any stories. And I'll say, okay, give me 5 times in your life. Maybe when you just got married, maybe when you went to school, maybe your first job, maybe a country visited. Okay. Tell me something that happened in each of those times. Well, pretty soon they're telling me stories. And I'll say, well, tell me more about that. And the story gets more complicated, more involved. I say, see, you do have stories. Oh, I never thought of it. And I think people imagine a story, I've got to think it through like a novel. I've got to have the end and all that. You don't. You just need to start with memory.
And that's why it's your story.
That's
your own story. Very original. This is incredible. I've loved talking with you, Steve. I wish we had so much more time. Is there anything else that we left out that you wanted to say to our audience and our listeners? Anything else that we didn't mention?
After I wrote the book, I went back and I looked at the traits, and I said, what are the commonalities there? Well, the traits were all focused kind of around, you can do it. Take a chance. Go make it happen. Do something. The principles were mostly focused around freedom and liberty and fairness. And the beliefs were focused around, who are you? And I think if we all could kind of answer those questions for ourselves, we could function a lot better and help others function better.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree. Well, As we wrap up, I'm going to do what we call Fresh Five. We're going to get to know you a little better. I wish we had more time for storytelling, but these are short little answers. You just let us know because we want to know, Steve. Are you ready?
Let's go.
Okay, Steve, first. Country or city? Would you rather live in the country or the city?
City.
City. Did you like math or English better in school?
English.
English. Okay, it's dinner time. You're at a restaurant, your favorite restaurant. What are you ordering?
Probably Indian food from a real Indian food in India or Africa where the food is in the middle and everybody eats with their hands.
Ooh, I love that.
And it's communal. You're sharing, not don't touch my food.
Yeah, everybody's involved.
Everybody's involved.
I like that. Your favorite holiday?
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving.
Because I love fall, I love the colors of fall, and I love the notion. And we haven't yet been able to monetize it like we have everything else.
Everything else. That's a good point. Okay, last one. What is making you smile right now in life?
Well, I'm known as an optimist. I smile most of the time. And I think I'm smiling in part today because I'm getting a chance to tell people about stories in ways that I hope will be helpful and useful to them. And I've tried to dedicate a lot of my life to making a difference, whether that was business or humanitarian or family. And at this age, this is, I hope, one more way I can help make a difference.
Oh, I think you definitely are. You're bringing people together through storytelling, Steve. You're fantastic. Where can we go to follow you, to get your book? What's the best place to go?
Okay, well, the book will be launched formally on Amazon in the next 2 weeks. We've got the proof copies. But the best place to go is the website, which is just steve-mann.com. It's STEVE-MANN, M-A-N-N.
2 N's.
.com.
Okay.
And there they can find more about me. They can find different stories. They can have links to podcasts. And they'll have all the information about the book, and they can even download the bonus chapter.
Well, you're inspiring. I mean, I'm thinking of all the ways I can go home and start storytelling with my daughter.
Right.
Today. I'm going to go home and do that. You're awesome. Thank you for joining us, Steve.
Thanks for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Appreciate you. And thank you for listening to another episode of Fresh Off the Set. Please rate, review, and subscribe, and we will see you next week. Congrats, you made it to the end. If you want to continue to freshen up your day, you can watch us on Fresh Living every weekday on CBS Channel 2 in Utah at 1 o'clock. You can also watch us on our YouTube channel, KUTV Fresh Living, and follow us on social media. We will see you next week.